The courtroom falls silent as Maya Johnson, 17, places a final document before Judge Wilson. Officer Blackwell pales, recognizing his dashboard footage. His confident smirk dissolves when she speaks. Your Honor, I move to dismiss all charges and request federal investigation into systematic racial profiling by this department. Before we dive into this powerful story of justice against racial discrimination, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you believe in standing up against injustice. Subscribe to join our storytelling community, and let's discover how a brilliant young mind confronted a broken system. Maya Johnson was born with a mind that operated differently than most. Growing up in the working-class neighborhood of North Philadelphia, she demonstrated extraordinary intellectual capabilities from an early age. By 3, she could read full sentences. By 5, she was devouring chapter books meant for middle schoolers. Her parents, both educators at underfunded public schools, recognized her exceptional abilities and sacrificed everything to nurture her potential. Their modest home was filled with second-hand books, educational games, and constant intellectual stimulation. But tragedy struck when Maya turned 8. Her parents were killed in a devastating car accident on their way home from a parent-teacher conference. The drunk driver who hit them received only a minimal sentence, something that left a deep impression on young Maya about the inequities of the justice system. Afterward, her grandmother, Eliza Johnson, a retired nurse with arthritic hands and an indomitable spirit, became her sole guardian. Despite her grief, Maya channeled her pain into academic excellence. She completed elementary school curriculum in half the expected time. By 12, she was taking high school advanced placement courses. Teachers marveled at her photographic memory, analytical reasoning, and ability to construct compelling arguments. Her 8th grade debate performance on constitutional law caught the attention of local media when she defeated high school seniors in a citywide competition. At 14, Maya graduated high school as valedictorian, becoming the youngest graduate in her school's history. Her speech about using education as a tool for social change received a standing ovation. A special scholarship enabled her to complete a pre-law program by 16, where professors twice her age would often seek her insights on complex legal precedents. Her academic paper on racial disparities in the juvenile justice system was published in a prestigious law journal, an almost unheard-of achievement for someone her age. The crowning achievement came when Harvard Law School admitted her to their special certification program for exceptionally gifted youth. This program, designed for prodigies who hadn't yet reached the traditional age for law school admission, allowed Maya to earn legal certification while still a teenager. Despite these remarkable achievements, Maya never lost touch with her community. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, she volunteered at the North Philadelphia Community Center, providing free legal advice to residents facing housing discrimination, unfair labor practices, and interactions with law enforcement. The contrast between how institutions viewed her academic credentials and how society treated her as just another black teenager was stark and painful. Store security would follow her through aisles. Teachers from outside her regular classes would express shock at her articulate speech, as if eloquence was somehow foreign to people who looked like her. Even as newspapers celebrated her academic achievements, commenters online questioned whether affirmative action rather than merit had secured her opportunities. The North Philadelphia community, however, embraced her fully. Neighborhood elders would proudly tell visitors about our Maya, who was going to change things for us. Local children looked up to her as living proof that their dreams could transcend their zip code. One formative moment came when Maya was just 10 years old. She accompanied her grandmother to a tenants' rights meeting where an elderly woman was facing eviction, despite having paid her rent. The landlord had simply lost her money order receipts. Maya watched as a volunteer lawyer helped the woman document her case and file for an emergency stay. The lawyer's ability to transform confusing legal language into protection for someone vulnerable made a profound impression. That night, Maya told her grandmother, "I want to learn how to do that." Years later, Maya still carried that memory as she navigated her accelerated path through the legal world. On the evening that would change everything, Maya was driving home from a tutoring session in her grandmother's aging sedan. The 2003 Toyota Camry had served their family faithfully for years, though the rear left taillight had recently developed an intermittent fault. Maya had wrapped red cellophane over it as a temporary fix until payday, when they could afford the repair. The neighborhood had seen increased police presence in recent months. The city had implemented a community safety initiative that residents recognized as thinly veiled increased surveillance of predominantly black and brown communities. Patrol cars frequently circled blocks, officers conducted random stops that seemed anything but random, and tensions between law enforcement and residents had escalated. As Maya turned onto Fairmount Avenue, just 3 blocks from home, she noticed the flashing lights in her rearview mirror. With a deep breath, she carefully pulled over, already mentally reviewing the proper procedures for police interactions that she had both studied academically and unfortunately needed to apply, practically as a young black woman in America. Officer James Blackwell had been with the Philadelphia Police Department for 15 years. At 38, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew the streets and believed he could spot trouble from a mile away. His broad shoulders, crew cut, and perpetual stern expression projected authority wherever he went. That Tuesday evening, he was patrolling North Philadelphia with particular attention to what the department called high-interest neighborhoods. When he spotted the old Camry with its makeshift taillight repair, he flipped on his lights and called in the stop. Initially, the interaction started professionally enough. "License, registration, and insurance," Blackwell stated flatly as he approached the driver's window. Maya complied immediately, keeping her movements slow and deliberate as she'd been taught. "Good evening, officer. The registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for it now," she explained calmly. "Just to inform you, the taillight has an electrical issue. We've scheduled a repair for this Friday." Officer Blackwell examined her license with growing skepticism. "This says you're 17, he remarked, eyeing her suspiciously. "That's correct, sir. I have a valid driver's license." His expression hardened. "And what are you doing out driving at this hour?" The question carried an accusatory tone, though it was barely past 8 in the evening. "I'm returning home from the community center where I tutor younger students," Maya explained. "I volunteer there twice weekly." Blackwell's demeanor shifted perceptibly as he looked more closely at Maya and the interior of the modest, well-maintained vehicle. What might have been a routine traffic stop with a warning began to transform into something else entirely. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered abruptly. Maya's heart quickened, but her voice remained steady. "May I ask why, officer? I've provided my documentation as requested." "I said step out of the car," Blackwell repeated, his hand now resting on his holstered weapon. "I have reason to believe there may be contraband in this vehicle." Maya recognized the legal implications immediately. "Officer Blackwell, respectfully, I don't consent to a search of this vehicle. Under Terry v. Ohio and subsequent precedents, you need reasonable suspicion of criminal activity beyond a traffic violation to conduct a search without consent." The mention of legal precedent visibly angered Blackwell. His face flushed as he leaned closer to the window. "Listen here, little girl. I don't need some teenager telling me how to do my job. I've been policing these streets since before you could read." "I understand your experience, officer," Maya continued evenly, "but I'm simply stating my constitutional rights under the Fourth Amendment." This response seemed to enrage Blackwell further. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unity 47. I've got an uncooperative suspect at Fairmount and 23rd. Possible contraband, requesting backup." Maya's training kicked in. While maintaining eye contact with the officer, she carefully reached for her phone on the passenger seat and activated the recording function. The situation escalated quickly. "What are you reaching for?" Blackwell shouted, drawing his weapon. "Show me your hands." "It's just my phone, officer," Maya replied, raising her hands slowly. "I have the right to record this interaction." Without warning, Blackwell yanked open the car door and grabbed Maya by her arm, pulling her roughly from the vehicle. The force of his grip would later leave 5 distinct bruises on her skin. "You're resisting arrest," he declared, though Maya had been fully compliant. As he pushed her against the car to handcuff her, Maya saw his partner, Officer Davis approached the passenger side of the vehicle. Through the windows, she clearly observed Officer Blackwell nod to Davis, who then leaned into the car. In the eye key. Side mirror's reflection. Maya watched as Davis slipped a small plastic bag into the space between the passenger seat and center console. Her stomach dropped with the realization of what was happening, but she kept her expression neutral. "Officer Blackwell, I can see your partner planting evidence in my vehicle," she stated loudly and clearly for her phone's recording. "That's a felony offense under Pennsylvania statute." Blackwell tightened the handcuffs to a painful degree. "Shut your mouth, nobody's planting anything. Look what we found in your car." Officer Davis emerged, holding up the same small bag Maya had. Just watched him place in the vehicle. By now, the commotion had attracted attention. Residents from nearby homes began to gather on porches and sidewalks. Several had phones raised, recording the incident. An older woman called out, "That's Eliza Johnson's granddaughter. What are you doing to her?" Blackwell ignored the growing crowd. "We've got suspected narcotics possession, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct." As he recited these fabricated charges, Maya's mind raced through legal strategies even as fear coursed through her body. She understood the dangerous position she was in, a young black woman alone with officers who had already demonstrated willingness to falsify evidence. The risk of the situation turning deadly was not theoretical, but immediate and terrifying. "I am not resisting," she stated clearly for both her recording and the neighborhood witnesses. "I do not consent to any search. I wish to contact my guardian immediately, and I want to formally state that the substance Officer Davis is holding was planted in my vehicle while I was detained." As Blackwell roughly guided her toward the patrol car, Maya caught the eye of Mr. Washington, the owner of the corner grocery store, who nodded slightly to indicate he was recording everything. Despite her legal knowledge and perfect compliance, Maya found herself in the back of a police cruiser, heading toward the precinct. The gravity of her situation pressed down on her chest like a physical weight. She was no longer the Harvard-certified legal prodigy, the community volunteer, or the academic star. To these officers, she was simply another black teenager from North Philadelphia, now at the mercy of a system she had studied extensively but was experiencing firsthand in its most corrupt form. The processing area of the 22nd Precinct bustled with activity as Maya was led through its fluorescent-lit hallways. Officers barely glanced up from their paperwork as another black teenager in handcuffs was brought in, a sight far too common to warrant attention. "Got another one thinking she knows the law better than we do," Blackwell announced to the booking officer, a heavy-set man with thinning hair who smirked in response. The next 2 hours subjected Maya to a systematic stripping of dignity. Her possessions were catalogued and placed in a plastic bin. Her fingerprints were taken, pressed forcefully into ink by an officer who sighed with impatience when she tried to wipe excess ink from her school ring. The flashbulb of the mugshot camera temporarily blinded her. Throughout the process, officers referred to her as sweetie, honey, and occasionally more derogatory terms when they thought she couldn't hear. One officer whispered to another hood rat with an attitude problem, loud enough for Maya to catch. The small holding cell where Maya was eventually placed already contained 7 women. The concrete bench along the wall left just enough space for everyone to sit uncomfortably close. The toilet in the corner offered no privacy, just a half wall. That did little to shield anyone from view. The overwhelming smell of disinfectant failed to mask the underlying odors of human distress. As Maya entered, several women looked up briefly before returning to their silent contemplation of the floor, but one woman with braided hair pulled back in a ponytail did a double take. "Aren't you the girl from the community center? The one who helped with housing forms?" Maya recognized her as Teresa Ramirez, a single mother who had come to the legal aid clinic about her landlord's refusal to fix dangerous electrical issues in her apartment building. "Yes, that's me," Maya replied quietly, taking the small space. Teresa made for her on the bench. "What are you doing here? You're just a kid," Teresa whispered. As Maya explained the events of the evening, other women in the cell began to listen. When she mentioned Officer Blackwell, a collective knowing glance passed between several of them. "That man has been terrorizing the neighborhood for years," said an older woman with silver streaks in her dark hair. "He stopped my son 3 times. In 1 month. Last time magically found marijuana in the car that wasn't there when my boy left the house." Another woman nodded. "He did the same to my nephew. Said he was acting suspicious, just walking home from basketball practice." Over the next hour, Maya listened as woman after woman shared similar stories about Officer Blackwell. Traffic stops that turned into searches, evidence that appeared mysteriously, charges that seemed designed to extract plea deals rather than pursue justice. A pattern emerged of targeting young black and brown residents, particularly those who didn't have the resources to fight back effectively. Maya was eventually permitted her 1 phone call. With shaking fingers, she dialed her grandmother's number and briefly explained the situation. Eliza Johnson's voice cracked as she learned of her granddaughter's arrest. $50,000, she repeated when Maya told her the bail amount. "Baby, I don't have that kind of money, but I'll figure something out. You just stay strong." The public defender assigned to Maya's case arrived around midnight. Marcus Williams was a tired-looking man in his 40s, with perpetually loosened tie and bags under his eyes that spoke of too many cases and too little sleep. He flipped through Maya's file with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had seen it all before. "Okay, so we've got possession of a controlled substance, resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. First offense. We can probably get the DA to drop the resisting charge if you plead to the others." Maya straightened in her uncomfortable metal chair. "Mr. Williams, I'm not pleading to anything. The charges are fabricated. Officer Blackwell and his partner planted evidence in my vehicle. I have legal training and I know my rights were violated." Williams looked up from the file, really seeing her for the first time. "Legal training? You're 17. I completed Harvard Law School's certification program for exceptional youth. I'm qualified to represent clients in certain proceedings under supervision, though I primarily provide legal aid consultation." The defender's expression shifted between skepticism and curiosity. "Look, even if what you're saying about your qualifications is true, representing yourself would be a serious mistake. There's a saying that even lawyers shouldn't represent themselves." "I appreciate your concern," Maya replied, "but I've observed that the public defender's office in this district has an average of 8 minutes per client due to case overload. I require more thorough representation than that, and since I can't afford private counsel, I'll exercise my right to self-representation." Williams sighed, rubbing his temples. "I strongly advise against this course of action, but I'll note your decision in the file. The arraignment is tomorrow at 9. The next morning, Maya found herself in courtroom 3B before Judge Patricia Wilson, a stern-looking white woman in her 60s with a reputation for running efficient proceedings. The courtroom's polished wooden barriers and elevated bench created a deliberate power dynamic that made defendants feel small and insignificant. Maya stood straight despite having spent an uncomfortable night in the holding cell and wearing the same clothes from the previous day. "The court will now hear Commonwealth versus Johnson," the clerk announced. District Attorney Robert Chambers personally stood to present the case, an unusual move for relatively minor charges. Chambers, a tall man with perfectly coiffed silver hair and an expensive suit, was known for his political ambitions and close ties to the police union. "Your Honor, the defendant is charged with possession of a controlled substance, specifically 30 grams of cocaine, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct during a routine traffic stop." Judge Wilson peered down at Maya over her reading glasses. "Where is your attorney, Ms. Johnson?" "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor," Maya replied clearly. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Wilson frowned. "You're aware that representing yourself, especially as a minor, is generally inadvisable?" "Yes, Your Honor. However, I've completed the Harvard Law School certification program for exceptional youth and am familiar with court procedures. I believe I can adequately represent myself in this matter." The judge looked skeptical but nodded. "Very well. How do you plead?" "Not guilty to all charges, Your Honor. Additionally, I move for immediate discovery of Officer Blackwell's body camera footage from the incident." DA Chambers smoothly interjected, Unfortunately, there was a technical malfunction with Officer Blackwell's body camera during this particular stop. No footage is available. That's convenient, Maya replied, unable to completely mask her skepticism. In that case, I request dashboard camera footage, radio communications, and any surveillance footage from nearby businesses. The Commonwealth will comply with standard discovery procedures, Chambers stated flatly. As to bail, given the serious nature of the narcotics charge, the Commonwealth requests continuation of the $50,000 bail. Maya stepped forward. Your Honor, I have no prior record. I'm a lifelong resident of Philadelphia with strong community ties. I'm a minor in the care of my grandmother, who cannot afford this excessive bail amount. I'm not a flight risk, and the Eighth Amendment prohibits excessive bail. I request release on my own recognizance. Judge Wilson considered this argument. Bail is reduced to $25,000. Next case. As Maya was led back to holding, she caught sight of a familiar face in the gallery. Jamal Washington, the community organizer who ran youth programs at the same center where Maya volunteered, gave her a subtle nod. That small gesture of support meant everything in that moment. Back in the holding cell, Maya requested access to the jail's law library. The request was initially denied until she cited the Supreme Court decision Bounds v. Smith, guaranteeing inmates access to legal resources. The small outdated collection of legal materials became her sanctuary. While other defendants played cards or stared at the walls, Maya pored over statutes and case law. She particularly focused on Officer Blackwell's history, using public records, requests filed through a sympathetic law library volunteer. What she discovered shocked even her. 12 formal complaints for excessive force against minorities in the past 5 years, all dismissed or buried in administrative reviews. Not a single disciplinary action had been taken. As word spread through the jail about the teenage legal prodigy fighting her own case, Maya became something of a celebrity among the inmates. Women would ask her legal questions during yard time, and she provided what guidance she could. Meanwhile, outside the jail walls, Jamal Washington had launched an online fundraising campaign for her bail. 17-year-old legal genius Maya Johnson was arrested on trumped-up charges while driving home from volunteering. Let's get her out so she can fight this injustice. The campaign went viral within the North Philadelphia community and beyond. If you've ever faced unfair treatment by those who are supposed to protect and serve, comment number 1 right now. If you believe the justice system needs accountability, hit that like button. And if you want to see how Maya fights back against this corrupt officer, subscribe to follow her journey. The question remains, how can a 17-year-old girl possibly stand against the entire weight of a biased legal system? Is it even possible to prove that evidence was planted when it's her word against experienced officers? Stay with us to find out how Maya uses her brilliant legal mind to uncover the truth. 3 days after her arrest, Maya walked out of the detention center into the bright afternoon sunlight. The online fundraising campaign had exceeded expectations, raising enough for her bail in just 72 hours. Grandmother Eliza waited, at the bottom of the concrete steps, arms outstretched. The moment Maya fell into that embrace, the stoic facade she had maintained throughout her detention crumbled. For just a moment, she was simply a 17-year-old girl who had endured a traumatic experience. "I was so scared, Grandma," she whispered into Eliza's shoulder. "I know, baby," Eliza replied, stroking Maya's hair, "but you're home now, and we're going to fight this thing together." Home was a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a well-maintained but aging building. Normally, it felt cozy and safe. Now it would become the headquarters for Maya's legal battle. The small dining table quickly disappeared under stacks of legal documents, case studies, and research materials. The walls of Maya's bedroom became covered with timelines, connection charts, and strategy notes. Sticky notes filled with legal citations adorned nearly every surface. The morning after her release, Maya's phone rang with an unexpected caller. Dr. Elaine Chen, director of the Harvard Law Special Certification Program. "Maya, we've been following the news about your situation," Dr. Chen said, her normally measured voice tinged with concern. "Are you all right? As well as can be expected, Dr. Chen, Maya replied. I'm preparing my case. The university is under pressure to distance itself from your situation, Dr. Chen admitted. Several donors have expressed concern about our program being associated with a drug charge, regardless of the circumstances. Maya's heart sank. Even Harvard, with all its proclamations about justice and equal rights, was considering abandoning her when faced with potential donor backlash. I understand, she said stiffly. However, Dr. Chen continued, I personally believe your account of events, and I'm not willing to disavow a student of your caliber without due process. I'm sending you some resources that might help, and I've arranged for remote access to our legal database for your research. The support from Dr. Chen provided Maya with crucial tools for her investigation. Using the enhanced database access, she began digging deeper into Officer Blackwell's history. The 12 complaints she had initially discovered were just the beginning. Further research revealed a pattern of targeting minority drivers, particularly in certain neighborhoods. In more than 60% of his drug arrests, the substances were found during searches conducted after routine traffic stops, a statistical anomaly that suggested selective enforcement. With Jamal Washington's help, Maya connected with several former arrestees who had encountered Blackwell under similar circumstances. They gathered at the community center after hours, sharing stories that formed a disturbing pattern. He pulled me over for a broken taillight too, said Darnell Robinson, a 23-year-old college student. Next thing I know, he's claiming he smells marijuana and searching my car. Suddenly finds a bag that I never saw before. Others nodded in recognition of the tactic. Through these connections, Maya was introduced to Ravi Patel, a technical expert who volunteered his skills. The police department claims the body camera malfunctioned, Maya explained to him. But I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for any partial footage that might exist. 2 weeks later, her persistence paid off. The department reluctantly released heavily redacted footage that began after Maya was already in handcuffs. They're claiming the first 8 minutes are corrupted, Ravi explained as he analyzed the file. But watch this timestamp here. He pointed to a barely visible code in the corner of the frame. That's not consistent with a spontaneous malfunction. This has been manually edited. This discovery was crucial, but Maya knew it wouldn't be enough on its own. She needed more concrete evidence of tampering. Meanwhile, a different kind of pressure was mounting. Every night around 9, a patrol car would slowly cruise past Eliza's apartment building. Though it never stopped, the message was clear. We're watching you. Anonymous calls began coming to their home phone, consisting of silence or vague threats before hanging up. One morning, Maya found a note slipped under their door. Drop the case if you know what's good for you. She didn't tell her grandmother about these intimidation tactics, not wanting to add to Eliza's worries. The local media had picked up the story, but the narrative was far from supportive. Teen with attitude problem challenges police, read one headline. Another described her as privileged student claims victimhood. The articles consistently mentioned the cocaine allegedly found in her car, but gave only cursory attention to her claims of evidence planting. The imbalance was glaring to Maya, who recognized how public perception was being shaped against her before she ever returned to court. The pressure began to affect grandmother Eliza as well. A lifelong employee at a local hospital, she suddenly found herself receiving write-ups for minor infractions that had never been issues before. Her supervisor, apologetic but firm, explained that concerns had been raised about her work performance. The message was clear. Maya's case was having repercussions beyond the legal system. Late one evening, as Maya pored over precedent cases involving evidence planting, a knock came at their apartment door. Cautiously peering through the peephole, she saw Jamal Washington with an older black man she didn't recognize. Maya, this is Samuel Cooper, Jamal said once they were inside. He's a retired detective who worked at the 22nd Precinct for 30 years. Cooper had the weathered face of someone who had seen too much, but retained a sharp, evaluating gaze. I've been hearing about your case, he said, settling onto their worn sofa. Blackwell has been a problem for years, but he's protected. Protected by whom? Maya asked. Captain Thomas Reynolds, Cooper replied without hesitation. They go way back. Reynolds was Blackwell's training officer, then rose through the ranks. Now he runs the district and sits on the police oversight board that reviews civilian complaints. The same board that dismissed all 12 complaints against Blackwell, Maya realized. Exactly, Cooper confirmed. And there's more. Reynolds has political aspirations. He's cultivated relationships with judges, the DA's office, even the mayor. He's built a network that protects officers like Blackwell who deliver the arrest numbers that make the department look good. This information opened a new dimension to Maya's case. She wasn't just fighting against a corrupt officer, she was challenging an entire system designed to protect itself. The realization was overwhelming, but it also clarified her strategy. This wasn't just about proving her innocence anymore. It was about exposing a pattern of abuse that had victimized countless others who lacked her legal knowledge and resources. As Samuel Cooper prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "You should know what you're up against, young lady. These people play rough, and they have a lot to lose if you start turning over rocks." Maya straightened her shoulders. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Cooper, but they chose this fight when they decided I was just another voiceless victim they could exploit. They were wrong." 2 weeks before the trial date, Maya received notice of a pre-trial hearing. District Attorney Robert Chambers had filed a motion to exclude any mention of Officer Blackwell's prior complaints or disciplinary history, arguing it was prejudicial and irrelevant to the current case. This aggressive move by the prosecution signaled that they were taking her case unusually seriously. Most misdemeanor drug possession cases were handled by junior assistant DAs, yet Chambers himself was personally overseeing every aspect of the proceedings. When Maya arrived at the courthouse for the hearing, she noticed an increased media presence. Reporters clustered near the entrance, cameras ready. Inside, the small courtroom was nearly full. Chambers stood at the prosecution table, flanked by 2 assistant DAs and a police department legal liaison. The message was clear. The full resources of the state were being marshaled against a 17-year-old defendant. "Your Honor," Chambers began once proceedings were underway, "the defense should be prohibited from introducing Officer Blackwell's personnel records or complaint history. Such information would only serve to confuse the jury and prejudice them against a decorated officer whose past interactions are irrelevant to the specific events of this case." Maya rose from her seat, conscious of how young she must appear to everyone in the courtroom. "Your Honor, the officer's history establishes a pattern of behavior directly relevant to this case. Under Federal Rule of Evidence 404B, evidence of prior acts is admissible to prove motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, plan, knowledge, identity, or absence of mistake. Officer Blackwell's history demonstrates exactly such a pattern." Judge Wilson raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the precision of Maya's legal argument. "Ms. Johnson, while your citation is technically correct, the bar for admitting such evidence is high. You would need to demonstrate specific similarities between prior incidents and your case." "I'm prepared to do exactly that, Your Honor," Maya replied confidently. "I've documented 12 prior complaints against Officer Blackwell, involving traffic stops of minority drivers that resulted in questionable drug discoveries. The statistical improbability of these incidents occurring randomly constitutes a pattern that directly relates to my defense." The hearing continued for nearly 2 hours, with complex legal arguments from both sides. By the end, Judge Wilson seemed genuinely torn. "I'll take this under advisement and issue a ruling before trial," she finally stated. Outside the courthouse, Maya faced a small group of reporters. One thrust a microphone toward her. "Ms. Johnson, how does it feel to have your Harvard education put to use defending yourself against drug charges?" The loaded question revealed the media's framing of her story. Rather than focusing on police misconduct, they were highlighting the supposed irony of a privileged student facing criminal charges. "My education has taught me that the law should protect everyone equally," Maya responded carefully. "This case isn't about me, it's about accountability in a system that disproportionately targets people of color." The resulting news coverage predictably twisted her words. One headline read, "Teen legal prodigy claims racial motivation behind drug arrest." The accompanying article barely mentioned the evidence-planting allegations, instead focusing on Maya's elite education and claims of systemic racism. Meanwhile, the pressure on Maya's support network intensified. Dr. Chen called to inform her that several major university donors had threatened to withhold contributions if Harvard continued to associate with Maya's case. The dean is standing firm for now, Dr. Chen explained, but there's significant pressure to issue a statement distancing the program from your situation. Grandmother Eliza's workplace harassment escalated. After 30 years of exemplary service, she was suddenly placed on a performance improvement plan with impossible metrics. The message couldn't have been clearer: drop the case or lose your livelihood. Most disturbing was the discovery that Captain Thomas Reynolds, Officer Blackwell's mentor and protector, had been appointed to chair the very police oversight committee that would review any internal affairs investigation resulting from Maya's allegations. The system's self-protective mechanisms were operating exactly as designed. One afternoon, Maya received a call from D.A. Chambers himself. "Ms. Johnson, I'm reaching out as a courtesy before we proceed further with this case," he began smoothly. "I've reviewed your academic record and community involvement. It would be unfortunate for someone with your potential to carry a permanent criminal record." "Are you offering a deal, Mr. Chambers?" Maya asked directly. "We could consider reducing charges to a single count of possession with no jail time. You'd serve probation, perform community service, and this whole unfortunate incident could be behind you." The offer was tempting in its practicality. Even if Maya won at trial, the process would consume months of her life and continue to impact her grandmother's well-being. But accepting would mean allowing Blackwell to continue his pattern of abuse against others without consequence. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Chambers, but I maintain my innocence and intend to proceed to trial," she replied firmly. "I suspected as much," he sighed. "Just remember this conversation when things become more difficult." The veiled threat hung in the air after the call ended. That evening, an unmarked envelope was delivered to Maya's apartment. Inside were internal affairs documents related to previous complaints against Officer Blackwell. The sender remained anonymous, but the documents revealed a disturbing pattern of complaints being systematically buried through procedural technicalities. One note in the margin, handwritten by Captain Reynolds, read, "Handle this the usual. Way, officer shows promise." The documents provided crucial evidence of the department's knowledge of Blackwell's behavior, but using them presented a legal challenge. Technically, they had been obtained outside proper channels and might be ruled inadmissible. Maya needed to find a way to introduce this information legitimately. Late that night, as she worked on her trial preparation, Maya's laptop froze. The screen flickered, then displayed a message: "Intrusion detected." Ravi Patel, whom she called immediately, confirmed her suspicions. "Someone tried to access your files remotely," he explained after examining her computer. Based on the digital footprint, the intrusion attempt originated from an IP address registered to the Philadelphia Police Department. The knowledge that law enforcement would go so far as to illegally access her computer was frightening, but it also confirmed that her case was striking nerves in powerful places. The next development came unexpectedly. A young officer named Daniels contacted Maya through Jamal Washington. They met discreetly at a coffee shop several neighborhoods away from the precinct. "I was there that night," Daniels admitted, nervously glancing around the nearly empty cafe. "Not at your traffic stop, but I heard Blackwell and Davis laughing about it afterward at the station." "What did they say?" Maya asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Blackwell said, and I quote, "Another one for the quota." Then Davis made a comment about how they helped the evidence along. "Everyone knows they do this, especially in certain neighborhoods, but nobody talks about it." Officer Daniels explained, "The unofficial but very real quota system that officers like Blackwell operated under. Arrests in targeted neighborhoods, particularly drug arrests, were rewarded with preferred assignments, overtime opportunities, and faster promotion tracks." "Would you be willing to testify to this?" Maya asked. Daniels paled visibly. "I'd lose my job, maybe worse." "I understand," Maya assured him, "but if you change your mind, you could help stop this from happening to others." As the trial date approached, Maya convened a strategy meeting at her apartment. Dr. Chen had traveled from Boston to offer support and guidance. Benjamin Marshall, a respected civil rights attorney who had read about Maya's case and offered his assistance pro bono, joined them. Together, they reviewed the evidence, anticipated prosecution tactics, and refined their approach. "We need to expand the scope beyond your individual case," Marshall advised. "This isn't just about proving your innocence. It's about exposing a pattern of discriminatory policing." "That's exactly what I've been thinking," Maya agreed. "The question is how to do that within the constraints of trial procedure." Dr. Chen smiled approvingly at her former student. "You're thinking like a systemic reformer now, not just a defendant. That's how real change happens in the legal system." As the meeting concluded, Maya felt a mix of determination and apprehension. The forces aligned against her were powerful, but she had assembled her own coalition of supporters committed to justice. The trial would not just determine her personal fate, but could potentially impact countless others who had faced similar injustices without the tools to fight back. The real battle was about to begin. The morning of the trial arrived with a tension that hung in the air like static electricity before a storm. Maya woke early after a restless night, carefully selecting a conservative navy blue dress and simple pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. The image she presented needed to counter the narratives already constructed about her, not the angry black teenager or the privileged Harvard elitist, but a serious young woman seeking justice. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Community members held signs reading, "Justice for Maya and End Police Corruption." A heavy police presence lined the steps, their faces impassive behind sunglasses despite the cloudy day. National media trucks with satellite dishes created a perimeter around the building, evidence that Maya's case had transcended local interest to become part of the broader conversation about policing and racial justice in America. Inside, courtroom 3A was filled to capacity. The gallery benches were packed with observers, journalists, community members, and a conspicuous number of uniformed police officers seated directly behind the prosecution table. Maya took her position at the defense table alone, arranging her meticulously prepared materials in precise order. Across the aisle, District Attorney Chambers sat with 2 assistant prosecutors and a police department legal advisor. Officer Blackwell, dressed in his formal uniform with commendation medals prominently displayed, sat behind them with his partner, Officer Davis. Judge Wilson entered, and the proceedings began with jury selection. Maya had researched jury dynamics extensively and used her limited peremptory challenges strategically. The resulting jury of 12 included 4 black members, 5 white, 2 Hispanic, and 1 Asian American, with backgrounds ranging from education to retail to construction. Following preliminary instructions, Chambers rose for his opening statement. He moved with the confidence of someone who had performed in this theater hundreds of times before. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this case is quite simple. On the evening of April 15th, Officer James Blackwell performed a routine traffic stop due to a vehicle equipment violation. During this lawful stop, he observed behavior that aroused reasonable suspicion. A subsequent search of the vehicle revealed 30 grams of cocaine hidden between the passenger seat and center console. Chambers paced deliberately before the jury box. The defense will attempt to complicate this straightforward case with allegations of misconduct and bias. Ms. Johnson, despite her youth and impressive academic credentials, chose to disrespect a law enforcement officer carrying out his duties. When that officer found illegal substances in her possession, rather than accepting responsibility, she constructed an elaborate conspiracy theory to avoid consequences. He gestured toward Maya. "Do not be distracted by the defendant's youth, her educational pedigree, or her claims of racial targeting. Focus on the evidence, which will clearly show that Officer Blackwell followed proper procedure and found illegal narcotics in the defendant's possession." When it was Maya's turn, she approached the jury with steady steps and clear eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Maya Johnson. Unlike Mr. Chambers, I don't have decades of trial experience. What I do have is the truth." She paused, making Eye contact with several jurors. The prosecution just presented a story that sounds plausible on its surface, but evidence will reveal a different story. One of a police officer who has repeatedly targeted minority drivers, planted evidence, and falsified reports to meet unofficial quotas and advance his career. Maya continued, her voice growing stronger. You'll hear testimony about a pattern of behavior that goes beyond my individual case. You'll see statistical evidence of Officer Blackwell's disproportionate targeting of minority drivers. You'll learn about the missing 8 minutes of body camera footage that mysteriously malfunctioned at the exact moment of my traffic stop. And you'll understand that what happened to me has happened to countless others who lacked the resources or knowledge to fight back. She concluded by connecting her case to broader principles. This trial is not just about 30 grams of cocaine that I never possessed. It's about the integrity of a system that is supposed to protect all citizens equally. It's about holding accountable those who abuse their authority and violate the trust placed in them. It's about ensuring that justice truly is blind to race, age, and zip code. The prosecution's case began with testimony from Officer Blackwell himself. Under Chambers' careful questioning, Blackwell presented the image of a dedicated professional simply performing his duties. I observed a vehicle with a defective taillight, which is a safety violation, he testified. Upon approaching the vehicle, I noticed the driver seemed nervous and was making furtive movements toward the passenger side of the vehicle. And what did you do then, Officer Blackwell? Chambers prompted. Based on my 15 years of experience, these behaviors indicated possible contraband. I requested the driver exit the vehicle for safety reasons. When she became combative and refused lawful commands, I conducted a search of the passenger compartment and discovered the narcotics. Blackwell's testimony continued with practiced precision, each answer reinforcing the narrative of reasonable suspicion, proper procedure, and legitimate discovery. When cross-examination began, Maya approached the witness stand with a calm she didn't entirely feel. Officer Blackwell, you testified that I made furtive movements toward the passenger side of the vehicle. Could you please describe exactly what movements you observed? Blackwell shifted slightly. You were reaching toward the passenger seat in a suspicious manner. Was I reaching for my registration and insurance, which you had just requested, and which I verbally informed you were in the glove compartment? It appeared suspicious based on my training and experience, he repeated, avoiding the direct question. Maya continued. You stated that I became combative. Did I at any point physically resist or threaten you? You refused to exit the vehicle when ordered. Is verbally citing one's constitutional rights considered combative in police training? Judge Wilson interjected, Ms. Johnson, please limit yourself to direct questions rather than argumentative ones. I'll rephrase, Your Honor. Officer Blackwell, in your report, you indicated that I physically resisted being removed from the vehicle. Is there any video evidence that supports this claim? As was already established, the body camera malfunctioned. How convenient, Maya remarked, earning a warning glance from the judge. Officer Blackwell, in the past 5 years, how many of your traffic stops have resulted in drug-related arrests? Objection. Chambers was on his feet. Irrelevant to this specific incident. Your Honor, Maya countered, this goes directly to establishing a pattern of behavior relevant to my defense. Judge Wilson considered. I'll allow a limited line of questioning on this topic. The witness will answer. Blackwell's jaw tightened. I don't recall the exact number. Would it surprise you to learn that 64% of your traffic stops of minority drivers result in drug-related charges, compared to only 7% for white drivers? Objection. These statistics have not been entered into evidence, Chambers protested. Sustained, Judge Wilson ruled. The jury will disregard the question. Maya pivoted strategies. Officer Blackwell, where exactly in my vehicle did you discover the alleged narcotics? Between the passenger seat and center console. And who physically retrieved this evidence? Officer Davis assisted with the search while I secured the suspect. So you did not personally observe the drugs until after Officer Davis retrieved them? A flicker of hesitation. That's correct. One final question. Why did you call for backup before conducting the search, referring to me as an uncooperative suspect when, by your own testimony, you had only asked for my license and registration at that point. Blackwell's expression hardened. I sensed you would be uncooperative based on your attitude. My attitude of providing the documents you requested and explaining the tail light issue? No further questions, Your Honor. The prosecution's technical expert testified next, explaining that body camera malfunctions were not uncommon and that the specific timing was coincidental but not suspicious. On cross-examination, Meyer established that the expert had never physically examined Blackwell's specific camera and was speaking only in generalities. Several officers from Blackwell's precinct testified to his character and professionalism. Meyer's cross-examination revealed that none had been present during her arrest, and all had close professional relationships with either Blackwell or Captain Reynolds. By the end of the prosecution's case, several jurors were showing signs of skepticism, taking detailed notes and exchanging glances during particularly questionable testimony. The day concluded with the prosecution resting its case, appearing confident despite the small cracks Meyer had managed to create in their narrative. That evening, exhausted but determined, Meyer reviewed her notes for the defense presentation beginning the next day. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. It wasn't just her own future at stake, but potentially the ability to create meaningful change in a system designed to resist it. Have you ever felt that the system was stacked against you? Comment number 1, if you've experienced or witnessed racial profiling. Hit that like button if you believe in standing up against injustice, even when the odds seem impossible. And subscribe right now if you want to see how Meyer builds her defense against these powerful forces. Will her witnesses stand strong against intimidation? Can she prove that Officer Blackwell planted evidence? And what will happen when she reveals the shocking evidence she's been saving for just the right moment? Stay with us to see justice unfold. The courthouse steps were even more crowded on the second day of trial. Community support had swelled overnight as word spread about Meyer's powerful cross-examination of Officer Blackwell. Local organizers handed out buttons reading, "Justice for Meyer," while a prayer circle formed near the entrance. Inside, Meyer took her place at the defense table, feeling the energy shift as she prepared to present her case. She began with character witnesses, calling Teresa Ramirez to the stand. Teresa described Meyer's volunteer work at the community center, helping residents navigate housing issues and employment discrimination. "She spent hours with my family when our landlord tried to evict us illegally," Teresa testified. "She drafted letters, researched precedents, and even accompanied me to housing court. She was only 16 then, but she knew the law better than the landlord's attorney." Taria Chambers' cross-examination attempted to portray Teresa as biased due to her friendship with Meyer, but Teresa's sincerity remained unshaken. Meyer's next witness was Dr. Elaine Chen, who testified about Meyer's exceptional legal abilities and ethical character. "In our program's 20-year history, we've never had a student with Meyer's combination of legal acumen and commitment to social justice," Dr. Chen stated. Her academic work specifically focused on constitutional protections against unreasonable search and seizure. Chambers tried to suggest that Harvard was distancing itself from Meyer, but Dr. Chen firmly corrected him. The university supports due process for all its students and doesn't prejudge cases before evidence is presented. Meyer then called Dr. Anthony Rivera, a statistician who had analyzed 5 years of arrest data from the 22nd Precinct. "Officer Blackwell's pattern of traffic stops and subsequent drug arrests shows a statistically significant racial disparity that cannot be explained by random chance," Dr. Rivera testified, presenting detailed charts and analysis. "The probability of these disparities occurring randomly is less than 0.001%. The prosecution vigorously objected to this testimony, but Judge Wilson allowed it after Meyer cited precedents establishing the relevance of statistical evidence in discrimination cases. The momentum shifted dramatically after lunch break. Meyer was checking her notes when Jamal Washington slipped into the seat behind her and passed a folded paper. "Anonymous tip just came through the community center," he whispered. "Check your email." The email contained screenshots of text messages between Officer Blackwell and 3 other officers, including his partner Davis. The exchanges explicitly discussed targeting certain neighborhoods for stops and included racial slurs. Most damning was a message sent the night of Maya's arrest. Added another one to this month's quota. Had to help the evidence along, but supervisor won't care as long as numbers look good. Maya immediately requested a brief recess to review new evidence. In the judge's chambers, she presented the text messages to Judge Wilson and DA Chambers. These messages only came to light this morning, she explained. They directly relate to Officer Blackwell's testimony and credibility. Chambers objected, strenuously. These are unauthenticated, possibly manipulated images from an anonymous source. They're completely inadmissible. Judge Wilson examined the evidence carefully. While I share Mr. Chambers' concerns about authentication, these messages, if genuine, are directly relevant to the defendant's claims. I'll allow limited questioning about their content, subject to authentication. Back in the courtroom, Maya recalled Officer Blackwell to the stand. Officer Blackwell, do you recall sending a text message on the night of April 15th stating that you had to help the evidence along regarding an arrest? Blackwell's face paled slightly. I don't recall any such message. Maya displayed the screenshot on the courtroom monitor. Is this your phone number? Objection. Chambers was on his feet. The defense is attempting to introduce unauthenticated evidence. Your Honor, Maya countered. I'm simply asking if this is Officer Blackwell's phone number which he can authenticate himself. The witness will answer, Judge Wilson ruled. Yes, that appears to be my number, Blackwell admitted reluctantly. But I don't recall this specific message, and text messages can be falsified. We can subpoena the phone records to verify, Maya suggested. I have nothing to hide, Blackwell insisted, though his demeanor suggested otherwise. The defense case continued with testimony from Ravi Patel, the technical expert who had analyzed the body camera footage. The metadata indicates that the recording was manually stopped and restarted, he testified. This is inconsistent with a technical malfunction which would create different error signatures in the file. Maya then presented her most powerful evidence, a technical analysis of the evidence bag containing the cocaine allegedly found in her car. The forensic report shows only Officer Davis's fingerprints on the bag, not mine, she explained. Moreover, microscopic analysis of the bag shows it was opened and resealed before being logged into evidence. Several former arrestees testified about similar experiences with Officer Blackwell. Routine traffic stops that mysteriously yielded drug discoveries, always in minority neighborhoods, always with the same procedural pattern. The cumulative effect of these testimonies created a compelling narrative of systematic misconduct. The most dramatic moment came when Maya called an unexpected witness, Sarah Daniels, the rookie officer who had previously expressed fears about testifying. To everyone's surprise, Officer Daniels had decided to come forward. There's an unofficial but widely understood quota system for drug arrests in certain neighborhoods, Daniels testified, visibly nervous but determined. Officers who meet these targets receive preferential assignments and overtime opportunities. And what happens to officers who don't meet these expectations? Maya asked. They get assigned to undesirable shifts and locations. Several have been passed over for promotion despite excellent service records. Have you personally witnessed evidence being planted? Daniels hesitated, then nodded. Yes. I've seen small amounts of drugs from previous legitimate seizures being held back specifically to use in cases where officers want to ensure an arrest. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Wilson called for order, her own expression betraying shock at this testimony. Chambers attempted to discredit Daniels as a disgruntled officer with performance issues, but personnel records Maya subpoenaed showed Daniels had received excellent evaluations until recently raising concerns about departmental practices. As the defense case neared conclusion, Maya introduced her most shocking evidence, a department-wide memo from Captain Thomas Reynolds establishing performance metrics for officers patrolling target neighborhoods, all of which were predominantly Black and Hispanic areas. The memo never explicitly mentioned race, but used coded language about high-interest zones and proactive enforcement. Judge Wilson initially sustained the prosecution's objection to this evidence, but Maya successfully argued for its admission by citing federal cases establishing the relevance of departmental policies in misconduct allegations. The memo's introduction visibly shook several jurors, who exchanged glances as they reviewed copies. By the time Maya rested her defense case, the atmosphere in the courtroom had transformed. What began as a straightforward drug possession case had evolved into an exposé of systemic discrimination and misconduct. News vans outside the courthouse had multiplied, and national civil rights organizations had sent representatives to observe proceedings. That evening, as Maya prepared for closing arguments, she received word that Captain Reynolds had attempted to meet privately with Judge Wilson, only to be firmly rebuffed. More surprisingly, a Department of Justice representative had been observed in the courtroom gallery during afternoon testimony, taking detailed notes. The case had clearly attracted federal attention. The prosecution's carefully constructed narrative was unraveling, and the broader implications were becoming impossible to ignore. What had started as one teenager's fight against false charges was exposing a pattern of abuse that implicated officers throughout the department and the supervisors who enabled them. Maya knew that regardless of the verdict, the system itself was now on trial in the court of public opinion. The third day of trial began with an unexpected development. As Judge Wilson took the bench, she announced that a special prosecutor from the Attorney General's office, Catherine Martinez, would be joining the proceedings as an observer. The presence of a state-level official signaled that the implications of the case had expanded far beyond Maya's individual charges. District Attorney Chambers appeared visibly unsettled by this development. The first order of business was the prosecution's motion to strike key portions of Officer Daniels' testimony and the departmental memo as prejudicial and irrelevant to the specific charges. Chambers argued forcefully that the trial had improperly expanded beyond the simple question of whether Maya possessed illegal substances. Your Honor, the defense has transformed a straightforward possession case into a sweeping indictment of an entire police department based on selective and decontextualized evidence, Chambers insisted. The jury should focus solely on whether the defendant possessed cocaine on the night in question, not on unrelated departmental policies or alleged misconduct in other cases. Maya rose to counter the motion. Your Honor, the prosecution's argument fundamentally misunderstands the nature of my defense. I am not merely claiming that Officer Blackwell planted evidence in my specific case. I am establishing that this action was part of a systematic pattern of misconduct, enabled and encouraged by departmental policies. She continued with precision and passion. The Supreme Court has repeatedly held that evidence of systematic discrimination is relevant when a defendant alleges selective enforcement. In Batson v. Kentucky, the court established that patterns of behavior are admissible to demonstrate discriminatory intent. In Wren v. United States, the court acknowledged that selective enforcement claims can be brought under the Equal Protection Clause. Maya cited 3 additional precedents before concluding, the departmental memo and Officer Daniels' testimony are not tangential to my defense. They are central to establishing that what happened to me was not an isolated incident, but part of an institutional practice. Judge Wilson considered both arguments carefully before rendering her decision. The motion to strike is denied. While I share Mr. Chambers' concern about maintaining focus on the specific charges, the defense has established sufficient connection between the departmental practices and the alleged misconduct in this case to warrant consideration by the jury. This ruling represented a significant victory for Maya's strategy of connecting her individual case to broader systemic issues. The day continued with prosecution attempts to rehabilitate Officer Blackwell's credibility through character, witnesses and technical challenges to the defense evidence. Captain Thomas Reynolds took the stand, testifying that the departmental memo had been misinterpreted and was merely an attempt to efficiently allocate resources to high-crime areas. Maya's cross-examination was surgical. Captain Reynolds, is it mere coincidence that all 8 neighborhoods designated as high-interest zones in your memo are predominantly black and Hispanic, while areas with similar crime statistics but majority white populations are not included? Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. Resource allocation is based on objective crime data, not demographics. Then you can explain why Riverside Heights, which has higher reported drug offenses than North Philadelphia according to the department's own statistics, was not designated a high-interest zone. When Reynolds claimed not to recall those specific statistics, Maya produced the department's annual crime report, which clearly supported her assertion. The captain's credibility further eroded when Maya questioned him about his relationship with Officer Blackwell. You've personally overturned 3 internal affairs recommendations for disciplinary action against Officer Blackwell in the past 7 years, correct? I review all such recommendations based on the evidence presented, Reynolds replied evasively. Yes or no, Captain? Did you overturn those recommendations? Yes, but the circumstances justified those decisions. And is it also true that Officer Blackwell served as your campaign treasurer when you ran for police union president last year? Reynolds' face tightened. That's a matter of public record, yes. The unexpected twist came when Reynolds was questioned about the text messages between Blackwell and other officers. When presented with the messages discussing quotas and helping the evidence along, Reynolds invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, refusing to answer whether he was aware of such practices. This development sent shockwaves through the courtroom. A high-ranking police official taking the Fifth Amendment in a case involving a 17-year-old defendant transformed the perception of the proceedings. During the lunch recess, breaking news alerts reported that the FBI had opened a parallel investigation into the department's practices. The courthouse steps became the site of an impromptu press conference by the police commissioner, attempting damage control. We take all allegations of misconduct seriously and will cooperate fully with any investigation, he assured reporters, though his stiff delivery lacked conviction. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution's case continued to unravel. Technical. Experts called to refute Ravi Patel's analysis of the body camera footage were forced to admit, under cross-examination, that manual interruption of the recording was the most likely explanation for the missing 8 minutes. When D.A. Chambers attempted to introduce a new theory that Maya could have touched the drugs without leaving fingerprints, Maya systematically dismantled this argument by demonstrating the impossibility of handling the plastic bag without leaving any trace evidence. As the day progressed, the crowd outside the courthouse swelled. Community organizations had organized a peaceful demonstration supporting Maya, with hundreds carrying signs reading, "Justice for Maya," and "End Racial Profiling." The perimeter of police officers guarding the courthouse entrance stood in uncomfortable contrast to the protesters they faced. Late in the afternoon, Chambers approached Maya with an offer. The prosecution would drop all charges if she would sign a non-disclosure agreement, preventing her from discussing the case publicly. The desperation evident in this offer confirmed what Maya already sensed. The case had implications far beyond her individual situation. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Chambers," she replied, loud enough for nearby journalists to hear, "but I believe transparency serves the public interest. I'll take my chances with the jury." The final prosecution witness was Officer Blackwell's immediate supervisor, Lieutenant James Wilson, who attempted to explain away the text messages as locker, room talk, that didn't reflect actual practices. Maya's cross-examination exposed that Lieutenant Wilson had received 3 promotions in rapid succession after implementing the performance metrics in his unit, with arrest numbers that far exceeded other precincts. As the day concluded, Maya prepared for closing arguments scheduled for the following morning. The case had evolved from her individual defense to an indictment of a system built on discriminatory practices and self-protection. Her closing argument needed to tie together the evidence of her specific incident with the broader pattern it represented. Outside the courthouse, Maya briefly addressed supporters. "This case is no longer just about me. It's about everyone who has faced a system that presumes guilt based on zip code and skin color. Whatever happens tomorrow, the truth is now in the public record." That evening, as Maya finalized her closing statement with Dr. Chen and Benjamin Marshall providing feedback, they received word that the Department of Justice was expanding its inquiry into a formal investigation of the department's practices. The following morning, as Maya walked up the courthouse steps through crowds of supporters and media, she carried not just her own hopes for justice, but the weight of a community's long-suppressed grievances. The system itself was now on trial, and her voice would be its prosecutor. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Patricia Wilson took the bench for what everyone expected would be the final day of trial. The gallery was filled beyond capacity, with journalists, legal observers, and community members packed shoulder to shoulder. Maya sat at the defense table, outwardly calm despite the hurricane of emotions within. District Attorney Chambers rose for his closing argument, his usual commanding presence somewhat diminished by the case's unexpected evolution. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "over the past 3 days, you've heard a great deal of testimony and seen numerous exhibits, but I urge you to maintain focus on the fundamental question before you. Did Maya Johnson possess cocaine on the night of April 15th? Chambers methodically reviewed the prosecution evidence, Officer Blackwell's testimony, the chain of custody documentation for the seized drugs, and the laboratory confirmation that the substance was cocaine. He acknowledged the defense's challenges, but dismissed them as elaborate conspiracy theories designed to distract from straightforward facts. The defense would have you believe that a decorated officer with 15 years of service risked his career to plant evidence on a random teenager, Chambers argued. They ask you to accept that an entire police department conspired against Ms. Johnson specifically. The simpler explanation, supported by evidence, is that the defendant was in possession of illegal substances and now seeks to avoid consequences through these extraordinary claims. As Chambers concluded, he appealed to the jury's sense of order. If we allow individuals to escape accountability by attacking the integrity of our entire justice system, we undermine the rule of law itself. The question before you is simple. Did Maya Johnson possess cocaine? The evidence clearly indicates that she did. When Maya's turn came, she approached the jury slowly, taking a moment to make eye contact with several jurors before speaking. "The prosecution is correct about one thing," she began. "This case asks you to make a choice between two narratives, but the choice isn't between order and chaos. It's between comfortable illusion and uncomfortable truth." Maya walked the jury through the evidence systematically, the statistical improbability of Blackwell's pattern of arrests, the manually interrupted body camera footage, the fingerprint, evidence showing only Officer Davis had handled the drug package, the text messages discussing quotas and helping evidence along, and the departmental memo establishing performance metrics targeted at specific neighborhoods. None of these pieces of evidence alone might be enough, she acknowledged, but together they tell a coherent story that explains not just what happened to me, but what has happened to countless others who lacked the resources or knowledge to fight back. Maya continued, her voice gaining strength. "The prosecution wants you to believe this case exists in isolation. But nothing exists in isolation. Context matters. History matters. Patterns matter. When Officer Blackwell stopped me for a minor traffic violation, I wasn't just a 17-year-old with a broken taillight. I was the latest in a long line of targets selected because of how I look and where I live." She reminded the jury of testimony from others who had experienced similar treatment, the statistical evidence of racial disparities in enforcement, and the institutional incentives that rewarded officers for drug arrests in specific neighborhoods. "This system wasn't created overnight," Maya explained. "It evolved through thousands of individual decisions, each seeming small and justified in isolation. Officers like Blackwell weren't born corrupt. They were shaped by a system that rewarded certain behaviors and overlooked others. Supervisors, like Captain Reynolds, didn't explicitly order evidence planting. They simply created conditions where such actions became necessary to meet expectations." As she neared her conclusion, Maya broadened her perspective. "This case isn't just about 30 grams of cocaine or one traffic stop. It's about whether we have the courage to see patterns that have existed in plain sight for generations. It's about whether we value truth over comfort. It's about whether justice is truly blind or whether it peeks through the blindfold to see who stands accused. Maya returned to her seat, the courtroom so quiet that the closing of her legal pad seemed thunderous. Judge Wilson instructed the jury on the relevant law, explaining the standards for reasonable doubt and the elements of each charge. As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, an electric tension filled the courtroom. Outside, the crowd on the courthouse steps had grown to hundreds, with community organizations providing water and food to supporters maintaining a vigil. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing aerial footage of the scene for national broadcasts. The jury had been deliberating for just over 2 hours when a court officer delivered a note to Judge Wilson. After reading it, she called the attorneys to a sidebar conference. Moments later, she announced that the jury would be returning to the courtroom. The gallery buzzed with speculation. Had they reached a verdict already? As everyone retook their places, Judge Wilson cleared her throat. "Before the jury returns, I have a matter to address." She looked directly at Maya. "Ms. Johnson, after reviewing the totality of evidence presented in this trial, I am taking the extraordinary step of dismissing all charges against you with prejudice." The courtroom erupted in gasps and exclamations. Judge Wilson raised her hand for silence before continuing. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have never witnessed such compelling evidence of systematic misconduct. The prosecution has failed to meet its burden of proof, and more significantly, the evidence strongly suggests that the charges themselves were the product of improper police conduct." Wilson removed her glasses, her judicial formality giving way to human conviction. "The judiciary has a responsibility not just to apply the law, but to ensure that the law is applied justly. When officers of the court present evidence that appears to have been tampered with, when sworn testimony is contradicted by objective evidence, and when patterns of misconduct become apparent, the court cannot in good conscience allow such a prosecution to continue." The judge's unprecedented statement continued for several minutes, acknowledging the systemic issues raised by the case and announcing her intention to refer the matter to the Judicial Conduct Board, the Attorney General's office, and the Department of Justice for further investigation. As the implications of Judge Wilson's decision rippled through the courtroom, Maya sat in stunned silence. Grandmother Eliza, seated directly behind her, placed a weathered hand on her shoulder, tears streaming down her face. The aftermath unfolded with dizzying speed. The Department of Justice announced a formal investigation into the 22nd Precinct's practices, focusing on racial disparities in enforcement and allegations of evidence tampering. Officer Blackwell was placed on administrative leave pending criminal charges for evidence tampering, perjury, and civil rights violations. Captain Reynolds resigned the following day as Internal Affairs launched an expanded investigation. Maya found herself at the center of a media storm. National news programs, requested interviews, and social media exploded with her story. Rather than bask in personal vindication, she used these platforms to highlight the systemic issues her case had exposed. "This isn't about one corrupt officer or even one department," she explained during a primetime interview. "It's about recognizing patterns of injustice that have become so normalized we often fail to see them." Harvard Law School, no longer facing donor pressure to distance itself from Maya, offered her a full scholarship to complete her formal legal education. When she turned 18, "Ms. Johnson has already demonstrated legal acumen and ethical commitment beyond what we see in many seasoned attorneys," the dean stated in the announcement. "We would be honored to help shape her formal legal education." Perhaps most significantly, Maya established the Johnson Justice Initiative, a legal defense fund specifically designed to help minorities facing similar situations. The organization would provide both representation and data collection to identify patterns of discriminatory enforcement. Grandmother Eliza received recognition at a community celebration where neighbors thanked her for raising such a courageous young woman. "I just gave her roots," Eliza told the gathered crowd. "She grew her own wings." In an unexpected development, former public defender Marcus Williams approached Maya about joining her new advocacy organization. "Watching you in that courtroom made me remember why I became a lawyer in the first place," he admitted. "I'd like to be part of the change you're creating." 6 months after the trial, the City Council established a civilian oversight board for police conduct, with Maya appointed as its youngest member. The board would have real investigative powers and authority to recommend disciplinary action, a structure designed to provide genuine accountability rather than symbolic oversight. The most personally satisfying moment for Maya came a year later, when she represented another young person facing charges, under circumstances strikingly similar to her own case. The difference was that now, with departmental reforms underway and increased scrutiny of police practices, the judge dismissed the charges at arraignment based on problematic evidence collection. Officer Blackwell ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple charges related to evidence tampering and civil rights violations. His plea agreement required him to acknowledge the systematic nature of his misconduct and identify others who had participated in or enabled similar practices. His law enforcement career was permanently ended. Maya harbored no illusions that the system had been completely transformed. True justice would require ongoing vigilance, persistent advocacy, and structural changes beyond what a single case could accomplish. But standing on the courthouse steps 2 years after her own arrest, watching a group of new police recruits listening attentively to her lecture on constitutional rights, she felt the unmistakable momentum of meaningful change. "Justice isn't an endpoint we reach," she told the recruits. "It's a continuous process of recognizing humanity in each other, of holding power accountable, and of having the courage to challenge systems even when they seem immovable. The law is powerful, but it's only as just as the people who implement it." As she concluded her presentation, one recruit raised his hand. "Ms. Johnson, what made you decide to work with the department rather than against it after everything you experienced?" Maya considered the question carefully. "Because lasting change comes from within systems as well as from challenging them from the outside. We need both. And because I believe that most people, when given the truth and the opportunity, will choose justice over comfort, even when that choice is difficult." The story of Maya Johnson, from 17-year-old defendant to catalyst for systemic reform, became a case study in law schools across the country. But for Maya herself, it was simply the beginning of a lifelong commitment to transforming the legal system into what it always claimed to be, a true instrument of justice for all. What do you think about Maya's journey from victim to champion of justice? Could you stand up against a corrupt system like she did? Comment below with your thoughts on how we can create more accountability in our justice system. If you believe in the power of knowledge to fight injustice, hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more powerful stories of courage and transformation. And share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that one person really can make a difference. Thank you for joining us on this journey toward justice. Remember, change begins with those brave enough to demand it. Maya Johnson's story teaches us that justice requires both courage and knowledge. When facing systemic discrimination, understanding the law becomes a powerful shield against those who abuse their authority. True change demands looking beyond individual incidents to recognize patterns of injustice that affect entire communities. Maya succeeded not just because of her exceptional intelligence, but because she refused to accept the narrative others created about her. She transformed her personal injustice into a catalyst for community-wide reform. The case reminds us that corrupt systems aren't dismantled overnight. They require persistent pressure from both outside challengers and internal reformers. When institutions prioritize metrics over morality, even well-intentioned individuals can become perpetrators of injustice. Maya's strategy of connecting her individual experience to broader patterns exposed how seemingly isolated incidents are often symptoms of deeper structural problems. Perhaps most importantly, Maya's journey demonstrates that one person with truth and determination can spark meaningful change. By rejecting the choice between personal vindication and systemic reform, she achieved both. Her story reminds us that justice isn't simply about punishing wrongdoers, but about transforming systems to prevent future harms. True victory comes not from defeating opponents, but from creating structures where fairness flourishes and dignity is preserved for everyone, regardless of race, age, or zip code. What would you do if you faced injustice like Maya? Would you have the courage to stand up against a corrupt system, even when the odds seemed impossible? Comment below with a time when you witnessed or experienced discrimination and how you responded. If you believe our justice system needs greater accountability, hit that like button right now to show your support. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of individuals fighting against prejudice and creating real change in their communities. Share this video with someone who needs inspiration to stand up for what's right. You never know whose life might be transformed by Maya's example. Thank you for joining us in this conversation about justice, equality, and the power of one voice to make a difference. Remember, in the words of Maya Johnson, justice isn't an endpoint we reach. It's a continuous process of recognizing humanity in each other.